Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Negotiators from Ukraine and Russia have opened their first direct peace talks in more than 2 weeks. Ahead of today's negotiations in Istanbul, Turkey, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine is unwilling to compromise on its sovereignty and territorial integrity, but is open to discussing neutrality and a prohibition on Ukraine joining NATO. On Monday, the Wall Street Journal and the investigative news site Bellingcat reported the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich and Ukrainian peace negotiators suffered symptoms of suspected poisoning after a meeting in Kyiv earlier in March. The symptoms reportedly included red eyes and peeling skin on their faces. The Wall Street Journal cited unnamed officials who suspected the negotiators were poisoned by hardliners in Moscow seeking to sabotage peace talks, but others have expressed skepticism. The BBC reports a senior Ukrainian official said members of the Ukrainian delegation were fine and that one of them had called reports of poisoning false. Roman Abramovich is in Istanbul today as part of the latest round of peace talks. Ahead of the negotiations, Ukraine's foreign minister warned his delegation to be cautious.
I advise anyone going for negotiations with the Russian Federation not to eat or drink anything, and preferably avoid touching any surface.
Ukraine's military says it has recaptured several towns from Russian forces, including Irpin, a strategic suburb outside the capital Kyiv. Meanwhile, the mayor of Mariupol said nearly 5,000 residents, including 210 children, have died in Russia's assault on the besieged city, which was home to nearly 500,000 people before Russia's invasion. On Monday, United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate ceasefire.
A cessation of hostilities will allow essential humanitarian aid to be delivered and enable civilians to move around safely. It will save lives, prevent suffering, and protect civilians.
In Russia, the prominent independent newspaper, Novaya Gazeta, said Monday it's halting operations until the war in Ukraine is ended, after the paper's editors received a second warning from a Russian state censor. Last year, the paper's editor-in-chief, Dmitry Muratov, won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work reporting in the face of government repression and censorship. Muratov recently put his Nobel medal up for auction, with proceeds of its sale set to support Ukrainian refugees. Also on Monday, the Kremlin ordered Russian media outlets not to publish a rare interview with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky by independent Russian journalists, including Dmitry Muratov. It's believed at least 150 journalists have left Russia since the start of the Ukraine invasion last month. President Biden said Monday he's expressing his moral outrage and not official U.S. policy when he suggested last weekend that Vladimir Putin should be removed as president of Russia. Biden's off-the-cuff remark during a visit to Poland on Saturday threatened a rupture in diplomatic ties between the U.S. and Russia.
I want to make it clear, I wasn't then, nor am I now, articulating a policy change. I was expressing the moral outrage that I feel, and I make no apologies for it.
Personal feelings, sir. Your personal feelings?
My personal feelings.
On Monday, the Pentagon said it's sending 6 Navy attack planes and 240 more troops to Germany to bolster NATO's military buildup during the war in Ukraine. The White House has sent Congress a $5.8 trillion budget request that would raise taxes on billionaires and corporations while massively boosting funding for the Pentagon and the police. Biden's budget proposal does not include items from his Build Back Better plan, which failed to pass the narrowly divided Senate over objections from conservative Democrats Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. The budget proposes more than $30 billion in grants to state and local police departments. It would also boost military spending by about 10% to a record-shattering $813 billion, eclipsing even former President Trump's Pentagon budget requests. Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders responded in a statement, quote, "At a time when we're spending more on the military than the next 11 countries combined, no, we do not need a massive increase in the defense budget," Sanders said. A federal judge ruled Monday that former President Trump and his lawyer likely committed multiple felonies in their bid to block certification of Joe Biden's Electoral College victory in the 2020 election. In a 44-page ruling, U.S. District Court Judge David Carter ordered Trump legal advisor John Eastman to turn over hundreds of emails to the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Judge Carter determined Trump and Eastman launched a campaign to overturn a Democratic election that was unprecedented in U.S. history, calling it a, quote, coup in search of a legal theory, unquote. Meanwhile, the Washington Post is reporting records released to the January 6th Select Committee show a gap of more than 7 hours in President Trump's phone logs as the Capitol was being assaulted. The Post reports the committee is investigating whether Trump communicated that day through back channels, phones of aides, or personal disposable phones known as burner phones. Also on Monday, the House January 6th committee voted unanimously to recommend criminal contempt of Congress charges against former White House aides Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino after they became the latest former Trump administration officials to refuse to cooperate with congressional subpoenas. In Afghanistan, the Taliban has banned several international media outlets, including Voice of America, the BBC, and Germany's Deutsche Welle. This comes after dozens of women, students, and teachers held a peaceful protest in front of Afghanistan's education ministry in Kabul over the weekend in response to the Taliban's order to shut down secondary schools for girls. This is a school teacher.
The Taliban are scared of an educated girl. When a girl is educated, a family will be educated. And when a family is educated, a nation will be educated. And finally, an educated nation will never, ever nourish the motives of terrorists.
The move prompted U.S. officials to cancel talks with Taliban leaders in Doha Friday to address key economic issues impacting Afghanistan. In India, hundreds of thousands of workers have gone on strike to protest Prime Minister Narendra Modi's neoliberal economic policies. A two-day shutdown began Monday, called on by dozens of labor unions from the private and public sector. Government workers, coal and copper miners, steel, oil, and health workers are among those who've joined the strike as anger mounts over mass unemployment, rising food and fuel prices, worsening poverty, and lack of access to health care and education. In Spain, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Madrid Saturday to protest the Spanish government's recent announcement it no longer supports self-determination for the Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara.
All Sahrawis in Spain have come here to demonstrate against the decision taken by Pedro Sanchez, which is once again betraying the Sahara. We feel betrayed because he said that he gives sovereignty over the Sahrawi territory to the Moroccans, and we do not feel equal to them. We are Sahrawi, and we are the ones who decide our rights.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Morocco Monday, where he's meeting with the kingdom's foreign minister. In Mexico, 20 people were killed Sunday when gunmen opened fire on a crowd watching a cockfight in a small town in the western state of Michoacan. Police said they found more than 130 caliber shell casings at the crime scene. Mexico's military has joined the search for the killers, but so far no arrests have been made. Last year, Mexico filed a lawsuit in a U.S. federal court seeking to hold 10 U.S.-based gun makers accountable for Mexico's epidemic of gun violence. The complaint says more than 500,000 U.S.-made guns are smuggled to Mexico each year. Meanwhile, a new independent report into the 2014 disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students says Mexico's Navy and Army officials had been surveilling the students and knew they were going to be kidnapped. The report also found officials hid evidence that could have helped locate the students. This is a member of the independent panel.
It was known by the authorities in Iguala, but also by authorities at the national level what was happening at the time of the detention and subsequent disappearance of the students.
Back in the United States, Academy Award-winning actor Will Smith has issued an apology for slapping presenter Chris Rock at the Academy Awards Sunday on the stage after Rock joked about Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, being bald. Pinkett Smith suffers from alopecia. In an Instagram post, Smith said his reaction was, quote, unacceptable and inexcusable. Smith continued, quote, jokes at my expense are a part of the job, but a joke about Jada's medical condition was too much for me to bear, and I reacted emotionally. I'm embarrassed, and my actions were not indicative of the man who I want to be. There's no place for violence in a world of love and kindness, he wrote. The Academy on Monday condemned Smith's actions and launched an inquiry into what happened. And in Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis Monday signed a bill that prohibits school discussions of sexuality and gender identity with students in kindergarten through third grade. DeSantis signed the bill, known by critics as Don't Say Gay, despite widespread condemnation from teachers, students, and the LGBTQ+ rights advocates who say the law will severely impact the mental health of children.
I don't care what corporate media outlets say. I don't care what Hollywood says. I don't care what big corporations say. Here I stand. I'm not backing down.
In a statement, the group Equality Florida said, quote, DeSantis has damaged our state's reputation as a welcoming and inclusive place for all families. This law will not stand. We will work to see it removed either by the courts as unconstitutional or repealed by the legislature, unquote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.